Welcome in to the Hot Read podcast here live on Friday, March the 7th. I am your host, JT Ruhnke, writer and reporter here at the 440 Sports Podcast Network. You can follow me on anywhere that you get your social media at JT_Ruhnke. Joined today on a Hot Read Happy Hour Friday that also you're going to have to explain to me what makes today so freaky, but I guess it's a freaky Hot Read Happy Hour Friday.
Logan put it in the chat.
He put it in the chat, so therefore it is a freaky Friday. It is my co-host, Stoney Keeley, editor-in-chief over at the Sobros Network, one half of Football and Other F Words, and co-writer over on stackingtheinbox.com. Stoney, how are you doing on this, I guess, freaky Friday?
Pretty good, man. Things are in order. I'm kind of a mess right now. I'm actually not wearing pants. I told you this before the recording, so we better hope nothing causes me to get up during the middle of this show. But sometimes we got to do what we got to do to make things happen. And in a rush, I'm here. Maybe that's what makes it Freaky Friday. And Logan didn't even know that when he put it in the chat.
You didn't even know that.
On the same wavelength with the chat today. It's Freaky Friday.
Yes, it is a Freaky Friday. And what better way to enjoy said freakness than with one of our two or maybe both our wonderful sponsors, ML Rose Craft Beer and Burgers, along with Sinkers Beverages. Of course, we are presented by ML Rose with 7 locations here in the greater Nashville area, including Capitol View, Franklin, Gallatin, Melrose 8th Avenue, Mount Juliet, Sylvan Park, and a new location coming soon in East Nashville near Inglewood. Thank you to ML Rose and Sinkers Beverages for sponsoring the show. More on them later, but we can jump in because it feels like it's kind of different from last year. I didn't expect free agency to be sneaking up on us like it has, and maybe that's because we are so in the weeds of the quarterback and the first overall pick conversation this year that it feels like free agency has been pushed to the wayside. But no, we have a lot of different moving parts coming around to eventually we're going to see them pay off next week. On, I believe, starting Tuesday, we'll start seeing where all these free agents land, and we get a bigger picture and a better idea of where the Titans may go in the NFL draft. Excited to talk about all of that and have you guys join in on the conversation. Reminder, if you're watching on Twitter or Facebook, head on over to 440 Sports YouTube channel where you can join the prophet Logan, who said it was time to get freaky, along with Alex, Coach Wills, Jill, and Kenneth, who said, I joined at the wrong time, hearing the first thing he heard is that Stoney does not have any pants on. Good to see all of you in here in the chat. Can't wait to have a great show with all of you today. And Drew brings up the first order of business, I think, that we have to talk about, which is Harold Landry officially released by the Tennessee Titans today. That came about, I would say, 2 hours ago or so. Drew says, who could have possibly seen this Landry news coming? Who could have seen it? Certainly not this show since week 18. But I mean, we're not going to harp on it. It is something that we've pretty much known or felt like we knew was going to happen for a long time now. I still saw people today shocked that the Titans weren't able to find a trade partner for Landry, which to those people, I say, maybe look in the mirror and like rewatch some of the games, because no one was probably going to trade for Harold Landry, even if he wasn't on a $17.5 million cap hit. Yeah. But the $17.5 million cap hit this next season is probably not going to cut it and not worth giving up trade compensation. So he hits the market like so many other veterans, and it does help out the Titans a lot. The Titans they could have saved all that money if they designated him as a post June 1st cut. As a team rebuilding and wanting to fill as many holes as possible, that probably was the wrong way to go. And they indeed released him outright, saving $10.95 million in cap space, $17.5 million in cash pre-6-1, which indeed it is, which makes the Titans now 7th overall in cap space with $63,159,053. Stoney, your thoughts on the move? Anything other than what we've already said? Honestly, it sucks for Titans fans, right? The
Yeah,
longest tenured Tennessee Titan. That award now, I believe, goes to Amani Hooker. I think
that was
it's either
what.
him. It's either
Z-
him or Jeffrey Simmons. I have to feel like, right?
yeah, and Zach told us that Amani Hooker technically signed his contract first, therefore he is technically the
Technically, based
longest
on
tenured
pen on
Titan.
paper, technically Amani Hooker is the longest tenured Titan now. But yeah, I mean, Harold Landry, 7 years with the team, was really one of the faces of the regime turnover from Mike Vrabel to this new regime under Rand Carthon and Brian Callahan, and now saw a losing season with Brian Callahan and a new GM come in, ultimately giving him the axe. A lot of good times for Tennessee and Harold Landry, a very
For sure.
productive player early on in his career, I should say, but ultimately what did him in is that ACL injury. And when you are a speed-based edge rusher and you lose your speed, you're not going to be worth that price that you once got.
Yeah, and I think when you think about what he was really a specialist at as a pass rusher, as the beloved Coach Mack of Titans Radio would say, the motorcycle lean. It was the bend for Harold Landry, getting around the corner to do it effectively. Like you are putting some stress on your knees to kind of get low and get around offensive tackles like that. And I do think it was the ACL injury that he was just never really the same after. Productive guy. I think he still had plenty of power to his game, but just never really had the flexibility and the juice that he had prior to that injury after that. And forgive me, I can't remember who actually said it, but I know whenever Deebo Samuel was recently traded for like a 5th round pick and fans were really surprised by that. While that was going on, I heard someone say this and it made so much sense, that the fans are usually like 2 years behind on the tape. So it may look like it's not much compensation, but really where the player is at now today, it probably is fair compensation. And I tried to, I think this show did a good job of trying to frame the expectations like, hey, Harold Landry is not the guy that he was a couple of years ago. It's going to be a day 3 pick at best if they can get anything for him. Would it be nice if somebody gave up a day 2 pick for him? Sure, but the expectations were it's gonna be a miracle if anybody's gonna give something up for him, especially with the optics of the cap savings and teams around the league probably knowing, hey, let's roll the dice on the Titans just releasing this guy, letting him hit the open market, and then make our pitch without having to give up any sort of draft capital. So I do think it makes a lot of sense. I think there were times this season that it felt like the writing was on the wall. That Father Time was kind of catching up to him. And it is sad to a certain extent because I do think in situations like this, people may, feel whatever they feel about Harold Landry, but I think putting the football aspect of this aside, this is a family we're talking about being impacted. This is a guy that's, going to have to uproot, move to a different market, that sort of thing. And this is a guy that gave this organization seven good years that he did play really hard and gave a lot for this franchise. So I do think that, it's a popular player, and I wish nothing but the best for him moving forward. But when you look at where this Titans organization is at right now, it probably was the best thing for the team to part ways and move forward without him.
Yeah, and ultimately, I know how much the opposite side of the coin, right? I think that was very well said. But the one point against that a lot of people had was, if Mike Borgonzi and Chad Brinker value loyalty to this team, being someone you draft, why would you get rid of him? Well, we saw exactly where the Titans fell on that matter today, right? There is a swift end for like the draft, develop, and retain model is nice, but there is a swift end to that cycle, which leads to fan favorites being
Yeah.
let go and cast off somewhere else in hopes of bringing the next guy up. I would say that Harold Landry was one of the few pieces over the past half decade or so that really embodied what the draft, develop, and retain method can be. And I think if anything, if you want to find a positive silver lining in this, right? You want to have more of these, like, even though it sounds harsh, but you want to have more of these moments saying we
For sure.
really had a guy. We had a guy who was here for half a decade or more that we were able to draft with our own capital. He becomes a fan favorite. And at some point, you have to hit the road. It's the diverting of paths from Fast and Furious, When I See You Again, or whatever. It's tough sometimes, right? Sometimes you hit on those players that are going to kind of retire with the team. I think Jeff Simmons is eventually someone who I think has a really good shot of staying with one team his entire career. Eddie says draft, develop, retain, but not retire. I would argue that. I would argue outside of like a really good, like, star-studded quarterback in any sport, how many times nowadays do you see players end up retiring with one team?
Oh boy.
You don't. I mean, I can like, this is a cross, and this is a little bit of a tangent, but like, I think that idea that fans get super attached and they need to stay because of loyalty gets in the way of how business and how franchises have started to evolve, considering that the cap continues to go up every year. Like, you are starting, when the cap goes up, players are going to start demanding more. And when you have players demanding more, those business decisions are going to have to eventually come to terms. Kenneth says Andrew Whitworth. I'll give you one that's kind of Nashville related, and my fandom of the Tampa Bay Lightning. Like, Steven Stamkos should have been a Tampa Bay Lightning for life. Yeah. And that price point just drove the Lightning out to where he's now a Nashville Predator. And sorry, Steven, your team sucks now and we're really good again. But like, that is, like Logan says, today, Brad Marchand on the trade deadline day was traded from the Bruins. He's been the face for 15 years. But getting back to the main point, like, it was time for Harold Landry. It's a good thing, like, to want to hold on to those players. But I think it's even more important that fans can say goodbye like this more times than just a Harold Landry, because that means your team is good, and that means you're drafting quality players who stick around and make your team competitive for half a decade. So that's where I stand on that, in my opinion.
And if you follow that model, you've got a guy waiting in the wings to step up and fill his spot, so that you're never hurting for any position, and that you can continue to go to the draft and just get the best player available pick after pick. What I like, just to reiterate the point that Eddie made, draft, develop, retain, but not retire. I like that a lot, because you get that second contract is usually when the player is hitting their prime. So you're paying them for their prime football. On the tail end of those contracts, a lot of times the reason you see guys cut, released, traded, whatever, is because they're no longer playing to that level of football, but they're still getting the premium contract for it. It's not an advantageous to be in when you're paying a player premium money for not premium results. And so that's why I think the draft, develop, retain, draft a guy, develop him, get him on his second contract, because that's typically when we see guys play their best football, and then move on if the market's too hot for you and it gets too expensive for that.
Yeah, and ultimately it might pain some people to say, like, if there is a spot for Harold Landry, I think it ends up being probably New England. Like, I find it hard that, like, he doesn't go there and becomes a rotational guy. I think Detroit could be a really interesting spot where he doesn't have to play those first two downs. Like, he can be a third down rotational guy and just let loose off the outside. Those are my top two, I would say.
I thought I heard somewhere that Detroit had actually called about Landry, or
I think they called about, because we were talking about that before the trade deadline. They were interested in maybe Key and maybe Harold Landry, and then they ended up playing the Lions that week, and it was essentially like an audition. Like, those two went off that week, and it was like their one good week where you were like, man, this pass rush can actually be really, really good. But yes, I agree here. Alex says even draft players at positions of strength, keep the shelves loaded. It goes back to that model that teams are trying to chase Howie Roseman and the Eagles. Get greedy at positions. Make sure, because if they're releasing Darius Slay, James Bradbury at the corners, guess what? You have Quinyon Mitchell, Cooper DeJean, they're probably going to try to find another corner or two in this draft. They even have
Yeah.
Eli Ricks on that roster, who is, like in the wings can be developed. Like they
Hmm.
know as well as anybody in the league at being able to just say goodbye to some of your longer tenured players, but have that talent here in the wings. Drew asks, it's why age is such an overrated part of the draft evaluation process. Look at Darius Alexander. You're drafting a guy for 2 contracts max at almost all positions. I would agree with that as
I
well.
I would
I think
say the
that's a fair
same.
point.
I would say the same can apply to some injury concerns, not too major, but I look at Tyjae Spears missing half his knees or whatever. Everybody was like, what, it's such a bad pick. And I'm like, yeah, but if you've got this guy like for a 3rd round pick and he's healthy, like he's going to be a good contributor to your team. Like not every pick that you make in the draft is intended to be like a 10-year Pro Bowl caliber player. So yeah, I think that's true on a couple of fronts. Is like I think people lose sight of that you're looking at like by and large 2 contract situations, and not every pick is going to be on this team for the next 20 years.
Yeah, I would agree. Ed Henry says solid pick at 2. I think that's what you want out of a 2nd round pick is what I think he meant there. I definitely agree. Logan saying
Absolutely.
Landry's best trait was playing 99% of snaps at a high level outside of coverage. He
Iron
was a guy
Man.
who was always on the field, and I think that's something that you can give him, and I think he'll continue to that's one of his traits, that he's a dependable guy. It'll be interesting to see where he lands, but he fits in to what I think this year's theme of free agency is. Like last year, the theme was what are we going to do about the running back position? What happens to the running back position? Like that was all the talk. And that was what the big
Mhm.
leading story of free agency. This year's free agency, as Cristoforo says here in the chat, it's like a purge. Nobody is safe. Like Coach Will says, the Seahawks released Tyler Lockett. It is a veteran purge. Out with the
Yeah.
old. We want as much new young talent as possible. You look at all the guys over the past couple of days in the 48 to 72 hours that have been let go, who are staples of teams from like late 2010s to the early 2020s. Joey Bosa, Khalil Mack, Harold Landry, like Devontae Adams, Stephon Diggs, like all these guys who are on the market. Tyler Lockett. You look at other guys around the league, like Trey Hendrickson wants a trade. Like you have so many
Mhm.
different guys on the move. Jonathan Hines Allen, like, or I guess no, Jonathan Allen, not Josh Hines Allen. Case in point, like there are so many like home like names that
Yep.
that are no longer going to be on their team, and they're going to be available. And I think it's an important time of year to like go through some of these, because you're always going to get veterans
Yeah.
who are going to be out there. But I feel like this year there's such an influx of those guys that it makes it truly an anomaly of a year. Maybe that's where we're getting to with some of these contracts, and you're going to start seeing more and more of this because of how lucrative some of these deals have to be because of what the market might demand for younger players.
Mhm.
You even look at a guy like Cooper Kupp who could be released. Stoney, like it is going to be so interesting when that bell rings on Tuesday and like everyone is free reign. I'm so interested to see where all these names who have been with their teams for 5 to 6 to 7 years now go and find new homes.
Absolutely. I mean, it's part of the fun of the free agent frenzy. It's like the first wave. To me, this kind of feels like the first wave of the offseason really hitting. I mean, it is, we've made it. Take a drink. It's a player acquisition cycle. It's starting all over again. Um, the one thing I do want to mention before I forget and we move on about Harold Landry is that I do not think that this tips their hand with the top pick in the draft
Fair
whatsoever.
enough.
I think that, listen, I don't want to like beat the guy up, but we've been talking about this on the show for a while. The play has declined. Even if they had kept Harold Landry, they needed upgrades at edge, and not just one, but 2. Like they needed to add some thoroughbreds to that stable. So this move, I've seen a lot of people that have said, well, they got rid of Landry, therefore this means that they're going Abdul Carter at the top of the draft. I just don't think that's true at all. I don't think it moves the needle at all with what they're going to do with the top overall pick.
If anyone had a question about Harold Landry being released the day after Abdul Carter was in Nashville, which was reported yesterday, they had their top 30 visit. If anybody thinks that's more than a coincidence, it isn't. And if you point to that tweet that he made earlier today, about 15 minutes after the Harold Landry news, that is, by and large, I'd almost be willing to put a mortgage on it that his agent said, go tweet this to like cause a storm and pick up your name once again. Like keep building that stock. No press, or all press is good press in the case of when you're trying to be the number one pick. Gets them talking about Abdul Carter again after the foot injury and things like that. I think that it was nothing more than that. But you do bring up, like, it is an acquisition cycle. How are the Titans going to address some of these needs here, I think is going to be the most intriguing part, because we kind of at the combine learned more of what being selective in free agent means. And I think when people think selective, it doesn't mean like, oh, they're looking for a specific type of player, or you're only looking for this. You're not looking for an old guy like this, or some, like, there's no qualifications. I think what we learned about it is that when they say they want to be selective in free agency, they're not going to do the Rand Carthon move of pivoting and chasing after another big time name just for the sake of a big time name. If they miss out on their player, they're going to be, they're going to be out of luck for lack of a better term. And that's how they want to be disciplined in their, plan at free agency. And I think with this class, from a fan's perspective, it can be really easy to dive into, if the Titans don't get this player, well, they should fall back and get this other big name. And I want to preface people by saying, like, this team is not going to go sign some of these big names for the sake of big names. This is a more disciplined front office than we've seen probably since mid John Robin era. That is going to go find the big names that they need at positions of need, and then kind of supplement through the foundation of small players. I think they go with a style of offseason closer to what the Commanders did last year, with like older veteran names on 1-year deals that are probably past their prime, but can still be role players in a sense, rather than go after some of these big wide receiver or edge or safety names that may be floating around after they get cut. That's at least how I think they might attack it.
Yeah, I feel like prudence is the way. I think they are going to be pretty careful, calculated with their free agent acquisitions. I don't think it's going to be, let's go get splash players. I think it's going to be, let's start installing a culture. Let's get some leadership, because I do think that this is a team that probably needs a little bit of it right now. Is like, they probably need a little bit of strength in that department. And that's not necessarily the guy that you're going to spend on. And as far as like the splash signings go, I just don't know that there are really any guys in this free agent class that make a lot of sense for them to spend a whole lot of money on. Now, I said, if they've got the cash to do it, you could go get a guy like Josh Sweat from the Philadelphia Eagles that's going to hit the market. He's probably going to be one of the top pass rushers signed out of this class, but if you're going to spend anywhere, you could spend there. I don't really mind that, but that's about as far as I'm willing to go with the big money free agents. And I don't really, I think Titans fans, if they're hoping for a splash next week, get ready to learn Morgan Moses, buddy.
Yes, I agree. So we can go through, I think, some like the 3 positions in free agency that have some of the biggest names, and see if there's any guy out there that it would make sense to go against the grain for. I think you start with the wide receiver position, and at the top, you have a list of wide receivers that would have won you your fantasy football league in 2017. Like Devontae Adams, Stephon Diggs, Keenan Allen, Amari Cooper, Chris Godwin, Brandon Cooks. Tyler Lockett makes the list now amongst other guys like the old man DeAndre Hopkins, Mike Williams, Brandon Cooks. There's a lot of guys out there. And even when it was reported yesterday. Apparently people were out on Tutu Atwell on this podcast network, Braden and the likes. It's a shame the Tutu Atwell dream is dead.
I mean, I wouldn't have paid him.
Unfortunately.
I wouldn't have paid him $10 million,
Yeah,
but
I wouldn't have
I
either,
thought
but
I thought Tutu Atwell was a pretty good piece for a receiving core to add in on the back end of it as like your wide receiver 5 that you call in for a gadget play and need some speed, somebody to just win down the field sort of thing. I thought he would have been great.
yeah. And so I think the opposite way where, as maybe like a Stephon Diggs or a Keenan Allen or an Amari Cooper gets signed to another place for $10 million, $12 million for a 1-year deal. And people say the Titans should go do that, to supplement their young quarterback or whoever their quarterback is going to be. I think the more realistic guys that you probably will see in this building come 2 months from now are guys like Mac Hollins.
I love Mac Hollins, though.
A guy like Elijah Moore, a guy like Marquise Brown, a guy like Olamide Zaccheaus, a guy like Greg Dortch, those role players who can play, in and outside based on their size and their specialty, but not someone who is going to be challenged for your big X role right now. You remember, like, this is a regime who are taking things from the Kansas City Chiefs model and the Green Bay Packer model, 2 models that really haven't had a number 1 X receiver since Devontae Adams when they drafted him in the 2nd round. Like, this is a team that is not built on those big name wide receivers. Instead, it's a bunch of different gadget guys who I think are going to try to be fit into what Callahan is looking for in a receiver. Now, does that also include maybe re-signing NWI? I think it's still a real possibility that NWI comes back. However, that being said, if you look at a guy like Tutu Atwell, who's getting $10 million a year for on a 1-year deal when he had 0 touchdowns, and NWI, who had 9, there may be a conversation I had that NWI in his touchdown spree outpriced himself for what the Titans are looking for going forward.
Well, I don't know. The Rams getting a jump on that is really interesting to me because they probably didn't have to spend that. Like, they probably could have let Atwell hit the market. I don't know that anybody else is spending $10 million on him, and then you get him back at a cheaper rate. So hopefully that's kind of clouding the market. But to your point, by the logic, if Tutu Atwell gets this, then Nick Westbrook-Akine should absolutely get more than that based on the production. So interesting to see. I don't know what his market is going to look like from a dollars perspective, but based on how
sorry, not to interject, but because of his market being kind of an anomaly, I think it makes it behooves the Titans to get a deal done before Tuesday.
Yeah.
Before he gets to that market and sees what a Mike Vrabel would do to get him in the building, or another place that can make him an effective wide receiver 2 and lure him away with a bit more money. Like, I think if the Titans needed to sign one of these like free agents that they have that are about to hit the market, it has all their attention now from after they meet with Cam Ward this weekend, I think has to turn to the attention of NWI.
Yeah. And Jason brings up a great point in the chat as well. Imagine the need if they didn't get Ridley last season. Not a good year to need a receiver. I echo that wholeheartedly. If they don't get something done with Nick Westbrook-Akine, that's going to be a receiving core. I think we've talked about it on this show that is like Calvin Ridley, Colton Dowell, Jaquan Jackson, Bryce Oliver. So like Bryce Oliver by default is your wide receiver 2.
Yeah. Well, it depends what you think of Treylon Burks.
Well, touche. I forgot about Treylon Burks. Yeah.
But, I do think that Kenneth, when looking at the wide receivers position for sure, no more champions of the offseason, more of a boring but necessary offseason that is filled with guys like Coach Will says, more possession wide receivers, more role players that can help build the depth and the body of this team before they have to go get playmakers. Now, another position where I think the Titans could kind of zag from this idea of being selective in free agency is the edge market. There's a lot of proven edge rushers who are still, kind of young. like there are some decently young edge rushers on the market who their baseline can be what Harold Landry did for you this
Sure.
year, 9 sacks, but maybe with a little bit more pop, maybe with a little bit more power. Some of those guys include Joey Bosa, Hassan Reddick, Josh Sweat, I think is a really interesting one. Like those type of guys on the edge. Could you see with their need now with Harold Landry gone and with it being a possibility that they sign or draft a guy like Cam Ward at 101? Is there a possibility that we see the Titans try to dish out big money to a guy like maybe Josh Sweat for him to come here and supplement that edge room?
See, I would have said yes if I didn't hear this report out there this week that they're sniffing around Javon Holland, who is wanting 15 to 20 million a year, because I would have thought that edge would have been the number one priority, and some of these guys would absolutely fit the bill. Probably be worth, I'm not saying that much money, but they would be worth being the crown jewel of your free agent class, paying them the most. But now it sounds like they're seriously in the market alongside with the Carolina Panthers for Javon Holland. And I can't imagine them spending big money like that on more than one free agent this year. I kind of feel like they're going to take the approach of the Washington Commanders a year ago, where it's just like 20 some odd contracts to 20 different players, and none of them are going to be all that big. So I don't know, we'll see. I think I'm in a situation where I feel like this is going to be one or the other. So maybe it's the edge rusher, but I don't think any of these guys that we've talked about are particularly inspiring. I mean, the youngest of the bunch would be Josh Sweat at 27, almost 28 years of age. So, I mean, worth it, sure, but I don't know. I don't know if I'm willing to make that leap anymore as I would have been a year ago anyway.
Yeah, I think ultimately though, because safety is another position of need where you have some pretty top tier guys like a Julian Blackmon, a Justin Reed, a veteran that you could bring in like Justin Simmons. Like you said, Javon Holland, Richie Grant, a bunch of these household names that you've heard before that they could bring in to instantly supplement that safety room and make that, get a guy next to Amani Hooker that is going to be set and forget for the next 2 to 3 years until you need to get younger again at the position.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think what Drew says here, where it says feels like they only get one big ticket item this free agency cycle, it's got to be either a guy at safety like Javon Holland or a guy like Josh Sweat. Or either way, they're going to find some value on this side. Like, could they look into a guy like Richie Grant? Could they look into bringing back a guy like Quandre Diggs? Could they bring a guy like, Jordan Fuller into the mix here for a pretty friendly deal? That isn't he's not exciting, but he's going to fill that hole as this team looks to rebuild. Yes. But if there's big ticket items, it's going to be one or the other. And it has to be, because outside of these three kind of positions, there's still another major hole at this team that they could look to spend big time free agent money on, and that's quarterback. And there's been a lot of talk about where the Titans may want to look at the quarterback market in this free agency cycle. And it starts with a guy like Sam Darnold. Stoney, I know our co-writer over at Stacking the Inbox, Zach Lyons, put out a monstrous piece on the case for Sam Darnold today. Your thoughts on Darnold? And I know when we get into quarterback, we've done good so far today. It's been a relatively tame episode, and we haven't mentioned that position too much yet. But if I were to tell you that next Tuesday or Wednesday, you see the Titans sign Sam Darnold on a 3-year deal for
Mhm.
around $33-ish million with like 60 to 70 of that guaranteed, which
Mhm.
basically means it would be technically a 2-year deal that they could opt out of the 3rd year.
Sure.
How much does that move the needle for you in terms of free agency? Is that something that you could see yourself signing on for?
Yeah, absolutely, because I don't think there is another free agent, any position, that would impact the Titans as much as having Sam Darnold at quarterback would. So that's where I'm at.
I agree with you, and I think I'm there as well. As Kenneth says that he'd vomit at that decision. Alex asks, because before we get into the weeds on that, would signing Darnold decrease the value of the first pick for the Titans? I don't think it would at all. Mostly
No.
because we've seen this work for Kansas City before. We've seen or heard from Mike Borgonzi talk about, if we draft a quarterback in the first, we are going to pair him with another veteran guy on the market. They are bringing in a
Yep.
veteran guy no matter what. It's not out of the realm of possibility to say that they sign Sam Darnold this year to a 3-year deal, front load a lot of that money, guaranteed money, into this year with the 63 in some odd change, like cap space they have a guy like Cam Ward or Shadur Sanders, but probably Cam Ward, sit for this year, then look into next year and you have your own type of JJ McCarthy, Sam Darnold situation, but it doesn't matter as much because you have him under contract and you're not going to be paying him that much guaranteed money. And then you can just cut it after that year. And you've successfully, if all things go well, have given Cam Ward a year to sit, a year to develop. He becomes your starter in year 2, and you're kind of off and running like the Chiefs did if Cam Ward is their guy and they're convinced on that, to then be your franchise guy. Like, I
Yeah.
think I'm with the consensus that I'm not going to pay Sam Darnold more than $35 million a year, and I'm not going to pay him guaranteed money past year 2. I think that's where I stand on Sam Darnold. But if you tell me that you're getting him for a 3-year deal with the guaranteed money in year 1 and 2 for under 35 million, I'm on board.
Yeah.
I'm on
I
board.
I am too, and I mean, what you just laid out is like, that's the perfect world. I mean, if you can get Sam Darnold to kind of maybe give the offense a bit of a spark this upcoming season, maybe you can kind of, it helps you evaluate, it helps you build up around him, and then you can make the seamless transition to your future at a slower pace that Cam Ward's not required to start week 1, because I personally don't think he is a week 1 starter caliber quarterback that we've seen in recent classes. So that's the perfect scenario for me, because you've both checked the box for this season while also building for the future. And I think depending upon how they fill holes in free agency, if they set themselves up to just take the best player available in the draft, they could still very well feel Cam Ward as the best player in the draft. So I don't think it necessarily prevents them from drafting quarterback, even if they do sign Darnold.
Yeah, I agree with you there. Jake brings up an interesting point, saying if you want a vet to groom, so to speak, surely you go after the one who imitates his game on said player. Bring Rodgers in and draft Cam Ward. I'm not disagreeing with you that the styles are similar and that that's someone he could learn from. I wonder if they would rather have the less of the headache and not feel the need to go and sign a guy like Devontae Adams as well,
Yeah.
just to mentor their quarterback. Like, that seems like a hard sell to me.
What?
Ed brings up, like, could you draft Cam and also sign Jimmy G?
Oh,
Like,
dude. So if you didn't
maybe.
listen to cover 2 today, Zach laid out a hell of a plan for free agency, like 16 players or something like that. And he said, like, sign Jimmy G, draft Cam Ward, and boom, you're good. You're solid. So yeah, it's a good name.
Yeah. Case in point, regardless of if they take Cam, if they trade back, like, there is going to be a veteran on this roster. What veteran that is I don't know. Another name that's brought up a lot is Justin Fields. I don't know if
Mhm.
Justin Fields is going to be available. It sounds like that there's a lot of talk between himself and the Steelers. Now, whether that ever gets resolved, I don't know. Titans have had preliminary talks, according to some reports, that if you want to believe or not, that Justin Fields could be an option in Tennessee. But ultimately, I think if you're looking for a guy to keep you somewhat competitive while having, even if you draft a guy like Cam Ward and have them benched for the first year, it's Sam Darnold or nobody to me, in my
Yeah.
opinion, because you're going to get the best bang for your buck and also have the best chance to be an average to above average team that saves Callahan's job.
On the Aaron Rodgers front, though, I just want to say, I want to pose the question: what do we think Aaron Rodgers would say? How do we think he would act if they signed him and then drafted Cam Ward with the expectation of like the heir apparent? Because I think that's a dynamic. I'm not too sure. I don't think Aaron Rodgers was too thrilled when the Packers drafted Jordan Love. So
That's fair.
don't know.
Yeah. And you're coming with someone you have familiarity with in Chad Brinker, the one who effectively was in that room when you made the decision to do that to Aaron Rodgers. I don't know if that would ever work. But
Yeah.
that's where I'm at on the quarterback. Stoney, before we move on to just kind of talking about my mock draft 1.0 and we get out of here, along with listening to some of your and discussing some of your comments here, the one position where the Titans must go heavy in free agency, like if you had to pick one position where they're like, I'm seeing them sign one big name and then like two others to help like build depth at that position.
Man, I think I'm probably going with the offensive line still because I think there's an opportunity to really like rebuild the right side of the offensive line the way that they did the left side of the line recently. I think this is a really good free agent guard class. I think it's really stacked pretty deep. I think there are a couple of guys that could probably come in and play right tackle for you. I think we've talked about Morgan Moses. We talked about Jedrick Wills. I think both of those guys both have familiarity with Bill Callahan, could come in and play right away. And then I think you probably still need some competition at guard. You might, I mean, I don't know how they feel about Daniel Brunskill, but you might need another backup center with some guard versatility. You might need tackle depth because outside of JC Latham, I don't know who's playing left tackle for you. We don't even know who's starting at right tackle, much less who's behind him. We've determined that John Njoku is no longer an offensive tackle, but he is the jumbo package tight end, completely different position. So you can't go to him anymore at right tackle. Like there's a spot where like they need some depth, they need some starters, and I think the market dictates that's probably where they should look to add the bodies because there are some quality options out there still.
Yeah, I agree with you there. Mine would be middle linebacker to me. I
Mm,
think that's one where, once again, it's probably the least sexy position of all of them. But when you're looking at this free agency class, there's an opportunity for you to dish out an unhealthy amount, like 20 million of your what'll probably end up being like 70-ish million dollars in cap space. And I'm
yeah.
going and I'm overpaying one of Nick Bolton. I'm trying to take EJ Speed from the Colts.
Oh, that would be
Isaiah
sick.
Simmons, Ernest Jones, come on back. Jamie and Sherwood, Dre Greenwall. I'm trying to get one of those guys to kind of set and forget. I'd also take flyers on guys like Tyrell Dotson, Willie Gay, younger guys who I think, like we saw with Ernest Jones, can come in and immediately make an impact. Like,
Yeah.
to me, my white whale of the offseason is I'm trying, if I'm the Titans, to overpay for EJ Speed and take him from the Colts because I think what he could do in that Denard Wilson defense is scary and would finally have that piece of the defense right. Like,
Yeah.
I think that would be a home run to me. But if they're also taking flyers on guys like a Willie Gay, a Tyrell Dotson, I think they have to because, like we saw today, like if they don't end up cutting Kenneth Murray, you still, have guys like, Luke Gifford hitting the market, Jack Gibbons hitting the market. You're currently there with Kenneth Murray, Otis Reese, and James Williams, like on the roster, like and Cedric Gray. Like that's not something I could ever feel close to being comfortable with, in my opinion, going into next season. And I think you have to bring in one of these guys. That's probably my pick. Your thoughts on that at all?
I'm a big Nick Bolton fan. And especially playoff Nick Bolton. Playoff Nick Bolton's like the Terminator, man. I don't know what it is, why he can't play like that for the entirety of the season. But I also, damn, I was just about to bring somebody up, and I got caught up in my emotions over Nick Bolton. Oh, EJ Speed, yeah. Note about him: when I was prepping for both of the Colts games last season, watching tape on the opponent, writing the little preview piece that I do for Stacking the Inbox, EJ Speed was a guy that I watched and was just like, holy shit, why aren't more people talking about this guy? Why don't more people know about him? He's a really good, rangy, feisty, scrappy kind of linebacker that I think checks both boxes in terms of, yes, it fills a need, but this is also a guy that is kind of a tone setter when it comes to playing hard, being a dog, that sort of thing. I like EJ Speed a lot.
Yeah, I do too. Drew says Nick Bolton paired with a hopefully developed Cedric Gray feels pretty nice. I would agree with you there.
Sure.
Ed says, do you think they do both free agency and draft O-line, sit mid-round O-line picks for a year or bite the bullet and go young next year from the start? I'm very on board with that. Coach says bring EJ in. Jake saying Jones and Greenlaw would be fantastic, or Speed. Kenneth, good old Kenneth, can always rely on him saying, just give me another QB tank season if we trade down. Double up on bad picks if JT thinks the Giants will be bad. Callahan is fired. A very exciting 2026. But yeah, that's where I'm at on that. Drew keeps asking about when day 3 tackles. Good things come to those who wait, Drew. Good things come to those who wait. That's coming. But unfortunately, they're bigger fish to fry.
I did, Drew. I did finally get around to watching Holland Pierce, watch some of his tape. So have that to look forward to. Is there such a thing as too long for an offensive tackle? Because Holland Pierce kind of feels too long in some plays. That's just a tease for our day 3 offensive tackle episode in the future.
I love it, which I think can be a transition into my mock draft 1.0 that I released yesterday on Stacking the Inbox. Before we dive into that and kind of review it, if you did not get a chance to see it yet, gotta give a shout out to our sponsor, ML Rose Craft Beer and Burgers. 7 locations in the greater Nashville area in terms of, where there's no spot where you're safe from an ML Rose. There's always one around. Capitol View, Franklin, Gallatin, Melrose 8th Avenue, Mount Juliet, Sylvan Park, and another one coming soon to East Nashville in Inglewood. Stoney, best selection of craft beers, over 25 on tap. The appetizers are fantastic and some of my favorite food I've ever had on the planet. And I gotta say, this Sunday, I will be trying the Stout Burger. Their burger of the month for March. I cannot wait. I'm going to make sure to add bacon as well and pair it with their preferred selection of beer that you have with it, the Jackalope Bear Walker. It's one of my favorite beers as well.
I love Bear Walker. I love Bear Walker. And I don't want to, no, I'm not going to ruin the ad read. I'm not going to take us off the rails. Continue. Okay. I'm sorry. Yeah. I have a story about Bear Walker.
Yeah, we can get into that right after I say thank you to ML Rose for sponsoring the show. Check them out. Find a location near you at mlrose.com. Also, shout out to Sinkers Beverages for sponsoring the show. 4-time Best of Nashville Liquor Store of the Year, where, if you don't want to drink beer at ML Rose, even though you should, because they have so many selections, and you want to get some to take home or have it delivered to you, because Sinkers does deliver, you can head on over to Sinkers Beverages to get you some Bear Walker by a Jackalope. Thank you to Sinkers for sponsoring the show as well. Stoney, you want to jump into mock draft 1.0, or do you have a Bear Walker story that you want
I'm not the mock draft is more important. I'll save the Bear Walker story for another day, but it's one of the few things that really has pissed me off as a media company throughout the years. So I'll just,
okay.
I'm hard. I feel like I'm pretty hard to truly piss off, and this story pissed me off. So,
all right. Well, Drew says that I cooked up a 7-course meal. I've got you. I have the go-to for the perfect way to plan out your ML Rose day, which just so you guys know, maybe a little bit of a tease. Cristoforo says, "Are you guys going to do a live collaboration draft show this year?" Yes. Could it potentially be at one of these 7 locations in the greater Nashville area that have
Oh
over
my.
25 beers on tap and can have you in person to have this 7-course meal as we go through the first round of the draft? Maybe. Just maybe. More details on that to come. But just keep that in the back of your mind here. Let's get into the mock here. Jake says this mock was one of the better ones out within the Titans media. Love the second round trade down. Appreciate that. Needed to hear that after someone said that my mock yesterday that it sucked and I don't know anything about ball. So that
Yeah.
certainly wasn't fun. But without further ado, let's let the people here in the hot read chat tell me if I cooked or I don't know ball. Either way, we're gonna get into it, and that's gonna start with the first overall pick. I did not. I've said many times that the Titans have to trade down at some point in this draft. In my mock draft 1.0, right now, it's not maybe what I believe the Titans should do, but it's what I believe the Titans are thinking about doing right now. Because I'm trying to be as accurate as possible and trying to get in the mind of everyone and figure out what the Titans might do. I think they stick at 1 and they select Cam Ward. I think when you listen to what they said at the combine, things about working with some of the flaws of a quarterback versus trying to fix them, the kind of eerie similarness to how they handled a Patrick Mahomes with Mike Borgonzi there, it makes sense that if they are truly convinced that Cam Ward is their quarterback in the future, there's no reason to try to trade back. You take him at 1 and you set yourself up for the next couple of years to build around him. You may not be good in year 1. You may not be good in year 2, but if you can develop him over the next 2-ish years and you're looking at 2027 when the new stadium opens where your team is back to that really uber competitiveness with a dynamic playmaker, if that's how they feel this team, that's the direction this team needs to be going in, and that Cam Ward is their guy, and that this year you're not going to get back to 1, you're not going to get close to 1 ever again, so might as well take the guy that you believe you can build around. They take Cam Ward, in my opinion, if that's how they feel.
Yeah, the feelings on Cam Ward seem to have swung significantly in the last week or so, to the point now where it feels like he has widened the gap between him and Shador Sanders. If you are looking for a potential, if you're looking for a high ceiling quarterback in this draft class, Cam Ward is probably the most likely of the bunch to hit his ceiling, has the highest ceiling, probably. You could debate that, but I think he's probably the logical choice if you're going to stick at 1 and you're going to pick a quarterback. So can 100% see the vision for that.
I agree with you there specifically. I wanted to also get this mock out of the way because we have free agency next week, and also everything could potentially change in the next 72 hours because they meet with Cam Ward today. If that goes swimmingly, they may just stick and pick, and you hear some of those trade rumors fade away. They like him, but the Giants are willing to get up. The Titans could be out of the first overall pick by the end of this weekend as they head into free agency. Like anything can happen. Head on a swivel. I feel like the next 72 hours, there could be a trade. I know 2 years ago, the Bears traded out on March 10th. It's March 7th. You're around the league, the new league year. Like at any moment, they could trade this pick. But, another piece of the puzzle today when they met with Cam Ward. I think that ultimately, after that meeting today, we haven't heard how that's gone. We haven't heard any insight into what they're feeling in the building, but we could start to see things either heat up or die down based on how things go today. I think that this team more likely thinks that the 30 visit will probably make him an even better prospect. Now, if they truly want to take him, I think they will in this mock, or they might trade out still. We'll have to see. But that leads us into the second round here, where I said it. The Titans have to trade at least once in their first 2 picks. They only have 2 top 100 picks, and they need to trade one out. I found that at 35, you probably will have a partner, but one of the partners where I think like I'm calling my shot, and I wouldn't be surprised if this is the exact trade that goes down, it's with Dallas. If Dallas passes on a guy like Ashton Genty, or Ashton Genty is not there, and they come up at the beginning of day 2, They still don't have a running back because Ezekiel Elliott is cooked. Their Rico Dowdle is a free agent, and we've heard Rich Eisen reported that the Cowboys are not very high on a lot of their pending free agents. This is a very deep running back class. I could see on the beginning of day 2, if Omarion Hampton is there, one of the 2 OSU running backs is there, Caleb Johnson is there, any of those guys that they like, I could see Stephen Jones wanting to trade up, get their running back, and it really wouldn't take that much. This is very similar. Zach Lyons put out a great trade chart of like some of the early day 2 trades that happened last year. This pretty much fit in line. Dallas trades the 44th and the 76th pick to Tennessee for the 35th overall and a 5th. So you give up one of your 5ths and the 35th to pick up another day 2 draft pick for the Titans, something they desperately need. And with that, they could go a lot of different ways. They could go wide receiver. They could go linebacker. They could go edge. They could go safety here. But I think there's no position deeper and better in the meat of the draft there on mid-day 2 than tackle. And I'm taking Ariante Ursary, a tackle out of Minnesota. I think he gives you a lot of different ways that you could structure this offensive line, even potentially kicking J.C. Latham back to the right side, keeping him at left. We saw at the Senior Bowl that he was playing on both sides, even though he played majority left tackle in college. I think there's a potential for him to move to the right side, maybe learn under a veteran, keep him cooking there for a little bit until he's ready to take over another role. But if you had to ask me, it was I like him. I like Anthony Belton. I thought it was a little early to swing on a guy like Belton, but if Ursary is there, I think you take him based on the talent and figure out where the fit is later on.
Yeah, I personally don't think you could go wrong with either Ursary or Belton based on what it looks like the market is like for both of those guys right now. I would expect Ursary to be more likely to be gone by that pick. Like if either of those guys aren't going to be available, I would think it would be Ursary based off where the stock watch is at right now. But I love both tackles. I think both tackles kind of fit the mold of what Bill Callahan wants in a tackle, just these big, thick-ass maulers that are out there. They moved Ursary to right tackle the week of the Senior Bowl. Well, they moved them both to right tackle the week of the Senior Bowl and got him reps there. I felt like Belton kind of struggled with the squattier guys. I think it was David Walker that was able to, sink his hips, dip his pad level down and get below Belton's hand and around to the quarterback a couple of times. Seemed like he kind of struggled with those type of players. But Ursary, to me, was pretty consistent all week long. Really strong hands, wide base, power, strength. He can be a little stiff on tape sometimes, but I think he's a good enough athlete. I think he's going to play tackle at the next level. And if you want a good rep from Ariante Ursary, I just uploaded one today as a YouTube short on the Sobros Network YouTube channel of him going one-on-one with Abdul Carter, giving Abdul Carter the business, getting in his face and letting him know about it too. So he's got that dog in him as well. I love the pick.
So, yep, they take Cam Ward at 1 overall. They trade back in the second and pick up Ariante Ursary. Drew says also he'll continue to preach Anthony Belton Ursary. Belton is no consolation prize, in my opinion. If they still were able to go right tackle or tackle overall in the second there at the 44th pick and they took a guy like Ursary or Belton, I would be happy with that either way, which moves us to our third round pick that the Titans have picked up because of the trade with Dallas, in which they'll be taking wide receiver Jalen Knoll, a guy who I had them taking in all of my mocks before this in the 4th round. He's a guy who has risen up boards because of how explosive and how well he tested at the NFL Combine, a 4.39 40, tied for the best wide receiver in both the vertical and broad jump at the NFL Combine, which should tell you all you need to know because even despite his size, 5'10", 194 pounds, having the best vert and broad jump shows you how explosive he can be from the slot, his route running ability. He was by far, in my opinion, the best wide receiver at the Senior Bowl. I know he also met with the Titans there as well, got to talk to them. Seems like they have some interest in one way or another. If they found themselves another day 2 pick, regardless of where it is, I love what Jalen Knoll could bring to this team in year 1 under Brian Callahan.
Yeah, absolutely. And it kind of feels like the Titans need a guy like this. They kind of need to add one of these. I mean, we call Jalen Noel a slot guy, but I think it's just because of his size. If you watch the Iowa State tape, they had no qualms about putting him all over the field. He was out wide sometimes. He was in the backfield, motion, gadgety kind of guy, not confined to the slot role at all. Ran some like deep post routes where he's splitting and getting wide open. And then when he gets to the second level of that defense and they're trying to close in on him, he hits a second gear and separates and pulls away. I mean, this guy could be a dynamic weapon in Brian Callahan's offense.
Yeah, I agree with you there, which leads us into the first of 2 round 4 picks, in which I don't know if he's going to be there because he's a guy who impressed at the combine. But if Andrew Makuba is still there in the 4th round and the Titans elect to not go the safety route, or even if they do and they want to get some depth in there, I think Andrew Makuba could be a guy who is a steal for them. His ability to be a playmaker and kind of, join his talents as a ball hawk with his run defense game, I think is something that you could see as similarly working very well next to a guy like Amani Hooker. He had certainly some of his best tape come in big moments down the stretch in the playoffs, something that cannot be discounted. A little bit undersized once again, but still hits that threshold, I think, in my opinion, to be at the NFL level. But I think Andrew Makuba, certainly, if you can find him on day 3 at the start, I think it's a home run pick.
Yeah, I haven't gotten around to Makuba yet, so I'll have to trust your evaluation on him, JT. But I would add that this is something that you and I have talked about. It's a really good, deep day 3 safety kind of class, and I would expect the Titans to address the future of that position at some point.
Yeah, and that leads us to our next pick here in the 4th round, which Titans still have not done anything at edge in my first mock. It's a deeper class. The talent may not be perfect for in the early day 3 in terms of setting and forgetting, having him play from day 1, but a guy who I think can develop into a nice role player and eventually a starter is Oluwafemi Oladejo from
Femi. Just call him Femi. Femi Oladejo.
Femi Oladejo from UCLA. I call him a Abdul Carter light, not in the sense that they play the same, but he's from the similar mold of being very, very young at the position, only 1 full year as an edge rusher, kind of converting from that middle linebacker position. He has a lot of speed and power to his game, but I think he can develop more of those tools to rush the passer. If he's there in the 4th round as a guy that they can develop down the line, a guy that they draft and develop to eventually be a starter, I think it would be a home run pick for him. And it's good value when you miss out on the edge position on day 1 and day 2. I think when you look at the day 3 options that are available, I think he is one of easily the best guys on the board. And if you can get him somewhere in that 4th round, even maybe at the 102, I think that is a really good pick and a solid guy that they can kind of bring in and have be a depth starter and a special teams player from day 1.
Yeah, I think he had a really good week down at the Senior Bowl too. I think this edge class is so deep that guys like Femi Oladejo kind of get lost in the shuffle. If you can get him day 3, that is going to be an absolute steal, in my opinion. This guy has some juice. He has some speed. He has some length. The physical traits look good. He's twitchy. He can move around, and he can flat out rush the passer. And I think anytime you can get a guy like that at that value, that's a steal, man.
Yeah, I agree there as well. A lot of these guys, as we talk about them, it feels like maybe fever dreams, but that's why it's mock 1.0, right? Like we're going to start seeing the board move around and see where they stack up, which leads us to my 5th round pick. And I'm going to be honest, this is the one where I know it's not going to happen, but I had to put him on here because I love the player. Like I can just tell you it's not going to happen, but Upton Stout, I think would be, Denard Wilson would be like foaming at the mouth getting this guy, a guy who can play safety and nickel corner, someone you could draft and have behind Roger McCreary until he eventually moves on from this team. Because I do think that this is probably most likely his last contract with this team. I don't know how much they really do like him as a long-term option. A guy like Upton Stout that could learn underneath him and be that physical, sticky press man kind of guy. Another guy who, the size, why I say he's an afterthought already. He's 5'8". Like, he is 5'8", undersized, but the way he plays is very similar to a guy who was also a Senior Bowl standout last year, Jarvis Brownlee Jr. He's another guy who is physical, feisty, aggressive, and my argument would be, I know he's about 1.5 inches shorter than a guy like Jarvis Brownlee Jr., but if we were willing to give a guy like that a chance, I think if you're getting a similar profile that excels in a Denard Wilson offense, I think you take the shot on a guy like that, get more depth at the secondary position, someone who is versatile, can play different spots, and he is a guy that I think in the 5th round could be a really nice fit on a Denard Wilson defense.
Man, he is scrappy. He is tough. He is feisty. He's not going to back down from anybody on that field. You talk about dogs, this defense looking for dogs. Upton Stout is a dog. But I also think like the smooth quality to his game is kind of being undervalued here as well. This is a guy that could be a nice project to develop. And when you pair him within the confines of this mock draft, pair him up with Makuba, like you've got a safety duo that you're looking at as like versatile playmaking pieces, tough-minded Upton Stout in there, complementing the range of Makuba. Like that's a good duo to work with and build off of for years to come.
Yeah, I mean, here Jason brings up the one point, right? 5'8" sounds like a big liability. It's a tough pill to swallow, which is why I don't think it'll happen. But he fits a lot of things that that Denard Wilson might really like. And Eddie, I'm not saying they're letting Roger go. I don't know if he fits the kind of mold that maybe Denard Wilson wants to build this defense around.
Whew,
and he obviously inherited him. But
I'm immediately going to Twitter like, oh my God, what has happened? They're letting Roger go, because Zach and I have talked about it, like him potentially being a trade target, because I don't know if his arms are long enough to fit the profile of what the Brinker model, the Borgonzi model looks for. So we've been low key talking about McCreary as a trade option. So I was like, oh shit, Eddie's saying they're letting him go. What's going on?
No, yeah. I just think he's a guy to watch. Similarly, like he's a guy that is going to be in the question. Do they want to retain him? He'll be coming up on a second contract. Has his play really merited a second contract when you have guys like L'Jarius Sneed, Jarvis Brownlee can supplement through there? I don't know. Would be an interesting conversation that we can have, which leads us to the 6th round pick. And this is a guy that I haven't watched a lot of, but he wowed me at the NFL Combine, which is Isaac Tesla from Arkansas. I mean, the 40 time alone should tell you that this is a guy that is going to be a speed separator guy that the Titans probably don't have on the roster. A 4.4 at 6'3", 214 gives him an RAS score of 996. Just an athletic freak that I think can be your gadget guy at the end of the day. That is probably like an upgrade from what Jaquan Jackson brings you in this offense in terms of gadget ability. Even his vertical and broad are in the elite tier, according to RAS. He's a guy that I would be willing to take, even though the production is not there. Like, at least the difference between him and a guy like Jaquan Jackson, the production might have not been there, but the athletic traits are. And if you're looking for a wide receiver late day 3, like Isaac Tesla is a guy that you take a swing on.
I don't want to hold that Arkansas offense against him, basically, is what I'm going to say. He tests well, surprisingly well, had a good Senior Bowl week as well. I like his tendency to pluck the ball out of the air, catching balls outside his frame. He is a tough receiver as well. You can go back and watch the Senior Bowl game, that final drive where Seth Hennigan, marches him down the field. Tesla made a couple of really big catches in that where, he had to go up and high point the ball and survive a tackle, a big hit, and he did it. He held on to the football. I think there's some toughness to his game. He's a more well-rounded receiver than that RAS would indicate. He's not just an athlete, and B, he's not just a product of the Arkansas offense. Like, don't hold that against him either.
Yeah, I like it. And you also, I kind of used all caps because it would look if I didn't, but it's Tesla. It's not Tesla. It's Tesla because the
Tesla.
S is also capitalized, correct? In his
Yep.
capital T, capital S, everything else lowercase, which is certainly It's up there for one of the more intriguing names in the draft. And then finally, in the 7th, there's no way he's going to be there. But if he was, I'm taking Clay Webb because I think
Love it.
we've had guys like Jalen Duncan, we've had a Juku Mania. This is the trilogy right here. We got to find a name for Clay Webb because he found his way onto this roster one way or another during training camp or in the 7th round. I'm already banging the table that this guy has the goods to start at the next level. You just have to go back and look at what he did at the Senior Bowl, specifically in his what he was able to do there. I mean, going up, even though he is a little bit undersized, going up against Deone Walker and holding his anchor and being able to play with those guys who from Power 4 schools should tell you all you need to know, even though he comes from Jacksonville State. This is a guy who I think Bill Callahan would love to get his hands on and be able to kind of mold into a guard that can play at the NFL level for years to come.
And I think there were a lot of people in Mobile that were expecting him to get some run at center. And I know that there were some opt-outs that week that kind of impacted the offensive line. I think Willie Lampkin ended up on that team as well as a late add to the Senior Bowl. And so they didn't have a lot of guard help. And I think that's why Clay Webb played so much guard at the Senior Bowl. But I do think that he offers some versatility if you can get him snapping the ball as well. He's a low center of gravity guy, lethal with his hands. I'm glad you mentioned Deone Walker because I was going to say people were marveling at this defensive tackle out of Kentucky. He's like Andre the Giant out there. And then he goes up against Clay Webb, and Clay Webb pretty much kicks his ass. And that's what he is. That's who Clay Webb is. He's an ass kicker. Anytime you see an offensive lineman out there not wearing gloves, that's your cue. This guy's a badass.
Ed brings up a good question, though, that we might have to find out. Does Clay Webb have the freak factor, though, that a guy like Leroy Watson? I don't know. We're going to have to find that out, but that's going to be my mock draft 1.0. I thought it was pretty good. I think it was pretty solid for 1.0. Obviously, free agency is going to probably change a lot of those different things. There could be a trade by the next time that I do one of these. Like, so many things can change, and I cannot wait to see what the rest of the off season holds for us, especially when free agency kicks off. We'll be back next Tuesday to break down a lot of what happens. The Titans may have signed some new players already. We'll have all the reaction and breakdown of what it means for the Titans. Then also, if you enjoy what we do on the Hot Read podcast and specifically want to hear more of me next week, I will be Braden has decided to jump ship and get out of Nashville, and he's tired of the discussion. So I'll be hopping on a football show Monday and Thursday, with Monday on with Paul Kaharski and Thursday with Nick Suss. Excited to talk to them and bring the hashtag backwards hat sweatshirt culture to the rest of the 440 landscape. Should be exciting. Can't wait to get into all of that. Ed says 70% chance by next Tuesday. They've traded the pick. If they haven't traded it by Monday, I would say there's a 0% chance that they trade it next week. I think then your next cycle ends up looking like 2-ish weeks from now that they would potentially trade the pick, I think. Which
there you go.
It's a fine line, but it'll be interesting. So many things can happen this weekend, but that is going to do it for the Hot Read podcast today. Thank you to ML Rose and Sinkers for sponsoring the show. And until Tuesday, when we might know some new Titans, see some new faces, we will talk to you then. Have a good weekend, everybody.